100 years ago, 50 years ago even, the average person was healthy. And today, if you look at the stats, the average person is sick and going to die of a chronic condition. And like, that is a travesty, and something that anyone who wants to live a long, healthy, and productive life, do their best at work, needs to underwrite and needs to think about as they're building their environment and trying to thrive in whatever they're doing.
Welcome to the Startup CEO Show. I'm your host, Mark Macleod. In this episode, I sit down with Justin Mayers, founder and CEO of TrueMed. Justin has founded several companies. He's had direct-to-consumer products that are health-related before this, and now he's on a mission to help wellness brands tap into government funds so more and more Americans can live healthy lives. We all know about the importance of sleep and exercise and food, but I don't know if we knew the extent to which we are full of toxins. Justin figured this out recently, and so I wanted to have him on to talk about that, but also as an ambitious entrepreneur to talk about his health journey and how he's been able to optimize his health without sacrificing his company. I think this is a really important topic and an important example for all founders out there. Yes, you can be healthy, and in fact, by prioritizing health, you're going to build a bigger company. Let's listen to Justin. Justin, welcome to the Startup CEO Show. It's a true pleasure to have you here. How are you doing today?
Thank you. Glad to have it. Glad to be here.
Amazing. So very often you will be maybe the 83rd or 84th CEO that I've had on the show. And with most of them, I've known them in some cases for years and decades. I just came across a few weeks ago when you were on Lenny's podcast. And I'm not sure if you know, but Lenny and I actually go way back when he had a startup called Local Mind. And I was one of the VCs that invested in his business, which of course Airbnb bought. And anyway, I've been fascinated with Lenny's journey with his podcast, and more relevant for this audience, fascinated with your journey on two fronts. One, kind of building and running a bunch of companies simultaneously, but also being on this health journey that I think is relevant for everyone. So, but before we get into that, maybe just tell folks who you are and what you do. This could take a while because you do a bunch of things.
Sure. Yeah. So I would say, I tell folks, I'm Justin Mayers. I started a bunch of different companies, but today the day job is, started a company called TrueMed about a little over 2 years ago. And what TrueMed is doing is we help, we're focused on the US, and we help individuals in the US use tax-free money and something called an HSA or an FSA account on lifestyle interventions, think like exercise, sleep aids, supplements, even medically tailored meals in some ways, that have been shown study after study to treat, reverse, or prevent disease. The big goal and the idea here is that if you look at the American healthcare system, almost $5 trillion are spent a year on it. Less than 2% of that goes towards anything resembling prevention. And almost none of that goes towards anything that we would call a root cause lifestyle intervention. So, you get sick, you have autoimmune condition or something like that. You can go to the doctor and get prescribed innumerable pills and surgeries, and those will be 100% covered for anything by your health insurance. And yet, if you start to get a flare-up of autoimmune or other issues, and you go to an insurer or someone and say hey, I want to change my diet, or I want to fix this, or I want to sleep better, or I want to take this supplement to help with this condition that I think I'm starting to develop, that's all on you. You're the one that's paying for that. And so I think this is kind of broken. Started TrueMed basically to make it possible for people to tap into these tax advantage funds and spend them on effective lifestyle interventions. So that's kind of that's the day job. Outside of that, I previously started a company called Kettle and Fire, which is now the largest bone broth brand in the US. And also I'm an angel investor. I've invested in 70 companies personally, and I'm a venture partner at a seed stage fund called Long Journey Ventures as well. So do startup investing, board stuff with past companies I started, and then run TrueMed as my full-time occupation.
Amazing. That's a lot.
It's fun though, it's we're tackling a big problem. Yeah. I really enjoy it.
No, you really are, right? I mean, you think about America, right? It's the largest Western economy, 10x the size of Canada where I live. And it's so clear, right? The standard American diet is just not working, right? The stats are sobering in terms of obesity rates, disease, chronic disease. Really, really, really sad. And we're not going to solve that on this podcast, but maybe we can bring it in and focus on on founder health specifically, since everyone listening to this is, a CEO or founder. And maybe I'll set up some context for this conversation. I mentioned shortly before we went on air that I started this community called Limitless. And, we just had our first event in Tulum last month. And the whole thing behind it, right? Like, as we were talking about, right? Like, biggest outcomes in the startup land, founder-led start to finish. Most CEOs fail, some go all the way. Set aside luck and timing. What is it that enables those certain CEOs to go all the way? And as I've thought about it, the thing I've landed on is we need to solve for energy. Like, most founders are doing it all wrong. Like, we celebrate bro hustle culture. I'll sleep when I die. I'll sacrifice sleep. I'll sacrifice exercise. I'll eat whatever mindlessly while I'm in some Zoom meeting. Basically, I won't take care of myself because I think that's what I should do, right? I think like the price of success is to sacrifice, have deferred life. And when I exit, then I'll magically make it all better and catch up. And I think that's exactly backwards, right? Like, and so what I'm trying to do with Limitless is create a community of CEOs who prioritize physical fitness, mental fitness, and spiritual fitness, which gives them more energy, mental clarity, and inspiration, and which makes it far easier to build really big companies. And you think about energy, what is energy? It's our capacity to create. And what are you doing in TrueMed and any of your prior businesses? You're creating right from nothing. You're turning a vision into a thing that exists. And so I was fascinated when I saw your interview with Lenny, because you've been on this kind of personal health journey. And I think I'm unfortunately going to ask you to say a bunch of things that you've said before, but can you walk us through kind of your journey and your discovery of kind of everything that we're doing wrong and how you've gone about fixing that when it comes to our health and toxins, et cetera? Because again, going back to this notion of energy, like we are what we eat, right? We have trillions of cells that are made up of what we put into our body. And so I'm going to turn it over to you and we'll see where the discussion goes. But I feel like it's super important for every ambitious founder to hear what you have to say.
Yeah. So at a very high level, I would say that humans used to live in an environment that was, let's say, like just much more closer to the one that we ancestrally evolved to spend time in. And so you can think about 100 years ago, my great grandma was not eating organic. She was not like making sure she was buying grass fed. She was just like, she existed in an environment where those were the only options. She existed in an environment that was not actively trying to poison her, was not using 1,000 different chemicals that the FDA had never regulated. It was not, covered in like trillions of microplastic particles, and was not using tons of different chemical additives and other things to trick her into being slightly more addicted to like foods that are ultimately not good for her and ultra processed. And so I think that the thing that people frankly have just not wrapped their heads around as much is this idea that, even as much as like 50 years ago in the 1970s, chronic disease burden was basically like 60% lower than it is today. We can talk a lot about big problems in the US, but I think one of the biggest problems in the US, and frankly, it's happening in more of the West now, is that the average human in these environments is sick. And in many cases, the average human in these environments is sick due to the being in an environment that does not promote good sleep, does not promote good diet, does not promote, toxin avoidance, does not promote any sort of these things. And so my view is that if you want to thrive, have energy, not be sick, kind of look like you do, into your 40s and 50s, I think that it takes being much more intentional and much more active about how you think about many of these things that are causing the largest chronic disease crisis in human history, which is what we have in the US. And so for me, I think that often boils down to a couple of things. Certainly people talk about diet, exercise, sleep, all of that. I think that all of these things are incredibly important. Toxin avoidance, I can go deep on any number of these topics, but my overall point is that, 100 years ago, 50 years ago even, the average person was healthy. And today, if you look at the stats, the average person is sick and going to die of a chronic condition. And that is a travesty and something that anyone who wants to live a long, healthy, productive work, life, do their best at work, needs to underwrite and needs to think about as they're building their environment and trying to thrive in whatever they're doing.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm 2/3 of the way through Peter Attia's Outlive, which has been sobering to read in terms of some of the stats, right? He calls the 4 horsemen right before leading causes of death. This episode is brought to you by Limitless. Limitless is an exclusive community of VC-backed CEOs who want to scale themselves and their companies without limits. The biggest outcomes in the startup world are founder-led. Meta, Amazon, Shopify, Airbnb, Canva, NVIDIA. Behind every one of these companies is a founding CEO who didn't just scale their business, they scaled themselves. They added 1 zero at a time and today run companies with billions of dollars in revenue each. That's the goal of Limitless, to give you the tools, strategies, mindset, and community to lead at the highest level without sacrificing your health, relationships, or purpose. Through group calls, an elite peer network, a proprietary AI coaching bot, members-only library, and in-person experiences, Limitless gives its members everything they need to keep scaling themselves and their companies for as long as they want. Go to limitless.ceo to learn more. I feel like people know about sleep, even though they don't sleep, they know about it. Maybe they know about nutrition. We can go there. They probably know they should exercise, but they don't. The thing that I felt was maybe where we have no knowledge is what you have discovered around just the extent to which we are full of toxins. Could you talk about that?
Sure. Yeah.
And then, of course, what you're doing about it.
Yeah. So one of the things that I think is one of the biggest problems in the country is this toxin problem that I talk about. So if you look, like 93% of Americans have glyphosate, which is the most sprayed pesticide in the US in their blood. 97% of Americans have something called PFAS. It's basically what's called a forever chemical. It's a small chemical that is an endocrine disruptor, meaning it messes up your hormones, meaning it has an impact across your entire androgen system. And basically it impacts fertility, like hormonal growth, all these sorts of things, especially when you're exposed at key developmental periods. These are forever chemicals because they don't break down. They're almost impossible to get out of the body. 97% of people have these in their bloodstream and in their urine. And so we are just like swimming in a sea of environmental toxins. In large part, this is because in the US specifically, relative to you all or the UK or much of the EU, we take the approach of just sort of assuming that the average novel chemical that humans have never seen or been exposed to is probably fine. And like in the rare case that it's not, which is obviously something I totally disagree with. And in the rare case that it's not, the FDA will do safety studies to understand, is this chemical bad and how do we get it off the market? That basically never happens. And so
that's backwards.
Yeah, completely. And so I think that the assumption here, there's something of this idea of like the precautionary principle. And I think when it comes to human biology and human health, we should not be assuming that any novel chemical introduction, is most likely good for human health. The EU, they take a very restrictive approach. They basically have allowed around 1,600 different chemical compounds to be introduced in their food, water, ingredient, like skincare, things like that. In the US, and they basically say only these compounds are allowed on the market after extensive safety testing. It's very similar to what the US does with pharma drugs or something like that, where we do a bunch of safety testing and then you can use it. The US follows the exact opposite approach. And we basically look for assume that a chemical is safe. Literally, there's something called generally recognized as safe, which is where a chemical manufacturer can run their own studies and tell the FDA without actually showing them any sort of studies like, hey, we tested this one thing and this chemical is totally fine. So this is what happened in the case of trans fats. Trans fats were introduced in the 1970s. Basically like over the next 40 years, they were everywhere. They were used in almost every packaged product that was using hydrogenated oils and fats. And estimates are over that 45-year period between where they were introduced and between when the FDA merely required them being on labels. They still have not banned them. Around 8 million people have died of heart disease, almost directly related to the inclusion of trans fats, in various products. And to me, that is just an example. And by the way, along the way, the first flag of trans fats are probably bad came from a scientist, Frank Kummerow, who in late 1970 wrote a letter to the FDA saying we think that these things are quite bad. Waited more and more data showed up. And only in the late 90s did him and a group of people actually sue the FDA to say, hey, the evidence is very much in favor of getting trans fats off the market. And only then, after like 7 more years in another lawsuit, did the FDA actually respond to say, okay, fine, we'll require like consumer packaged goods companies, they actually label and include trans fats on their nutrition labels. We're not banning them. We're not limiting them. We're not doing anything. Just has to be on the label. Now, I think that like you could maybe make an argument that this like let whatever chemicals in the system go, and like we watch carefully and we're very responsive if we see any sort of potential risk. Like if you balance the let it go but like are very responsive to risk approaches, maybe that approach makes sense. But in a situation where it takes 50 years to get some of these compounds that we know are causing chronic disease like heart disease off the market, or even get them on a nutrition label, like there is no possible way that we should be taking any sort of approach where it's like, yes, give me all the novel environmental chemicals and toxins that, by the way, as a random individual in the US, you can't even opt out of. Like, what would it even mean to say as a consumer, I want to avoid PFAS, I want to avoid glyphosate, and I don't want any trans fats in my foods? Basically impossible.
Awful.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not a big ketchup fan, but I've noticed the ingredient list for ketchup in the UK as an example versus the US, they're completely different products.
Definitely. I mean, if you look like I can't even find it right now, but if you look like I think it's in French fries, McDonald's French fries, McDonald's, obviously same company. In the US, they're selling a product that has like something like 35 different ingredients. In the UK, it's like 4. And, again, I'm not saying UK French fries are incredibly healthy, but certainly like there are 15 to 20 different ingredients that are in US French fries that don't need to be there, that have almost never been in human biology ever, that certainly like probably we should take an approach of maybe this thing isn't actually that healthy.
Mm-hmm. We won't solve this from a political standpoint, but just for my own amusement, do you think, is the root cause of this, corporations are obviously pathologically interested in profit. I don't think we have a solve for that unless it's legislated, but like, is the other root cause of this just lobbying? And is there a solve for that?
Yeah, I think that I think there's 2 root causes here. I think that, one, you can certainly blame corporations and lobbying. I think that certainly like FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, they spend a lot of time and money on drugs, almost nothing on food. I think food is basically causing many of the chronic conditions that exist in the US. Hopefully that's changing. I think like Marty McCary and the FDA today is doing a tremendous job, and taking a very hard look at a lot of the food stuff that I think is important. But, I think a lot of it is legislative, like even just switching things like food, the food pyramid, changing what we put in like school lunches and hospital foods and prison foods and militaries, changing our approach to generally recognize as safe, this sort of like insane approach that we have to regulating chemicals that I just mentioned. Just switching those couple things, and you could even just copy European standards or copy another country that has better outcomes from a chronic disease standpoint. Just doing that would be a tremendous upgrade in the US system. And I think that's purely regulatory. I think the other side of this is that, frankly, the US, we have some of the lowest, like as a percentage of income, the US spends some of the least on our food of any nation in the world. Like Europeans, I think that in the US, we spend around like 17% of our income on food. Europeans, that's like 25, 28%, depending on the country. Now, yes, like Americans are wealthier on a per capita GDP basis, but still, I think that one of the things is to not absolve the American consumer a little bit. There's a crazy demand for food that is like cheap, tastes good, and is kind of addictive. Money. Yeah. And so, it like part of this has been that in the 80s and in the 90s, like people thought, and we're thinking a lot about how, oh wow, like a Twinkie or a Snackwell thing that's fat free is healthy. Like maybe I'll buy that rather than get anything resembling a whole food. And so there has been a lot of demand for these kinds of foods. Like, yes, I think they're artificially cheap. Yeah. I think they're artificially cheap. I think they're, addictive, but I think that a big part of the change has to be the American consumer deciding, I'm no longer going to buy this crappy product that is making me sick from some big food conglomerate. Like I'm going to invest in real food made by producers that share my values.
Yep. I totally agree with that. So since we won't solve this at a macro level, like, do you have a set of recommended practices for, anybody who wants to be healthy, but obviously founders trying to be the best version of themselves?
For sure. So I kind of mentioned in the beginning, I think that a lot of this is it just comes down to your environment. Like if you look at the animal kingdom, for example, If you take an animal and, an animal in the wild will almost never be obese. It will almost never have like many of the chronic conditions that we associate with Americans and others in the West today. You put an animal in the zoo, you feed it a non-species appropriate diet, you prevent it from moving, you mess up its sleep. All of a sudden that animal gets sick, it gets fat, it starts losing its hair, it starts developing ticks, like all these crazy things. I think that you can kind of analogize that to humans, where I think that the biggest thing to think about as an individual is how do you build your environment or influence or change your environment so that it is health promoting and not health detracting. And for me, that means a couple things. Like one, making sure that you're sleeping well. So, going to bed at appropriate times, probably changing the lights in your house, removing like blue light that comes from LEDs, having blackout curtains, having a decent mattress, even using something like an 8 Sleep, which like I personally love. Doing things like that. Focusing on your diet. I think that sourcing as often as you can, organic, local food, participating in what is almost certain to be like almost everyone has access to a local food system around them of farmers markets, small grocery stores, places that are selling products that are really, really high quality. I think that a good rule of thumb, frankly, maybe you could say I'm biased, but I like truly believe this, is basically just don't buy anything from a big food conglomerate. If it's made by a big food company, don't buy it. It's like almost certainly these are not companies that are thinking about your health when they come to think about designing different products and selling products. Next thing I think a lot about is like toxin avoidance. And so that means filtering your water, probably filtering your air, swapping out a lot of things in your clothes so that you're not getting like polyester and you're, not wearing polyester underwear, things like this. There have been a lot of studies that show polyester underwear lowers sperm count. They put dogs in polyester underwear for like a year. Sperm count went down like 40%.
Wow.
Fortunately though, dogs, like they switched them back to different, dog underwear that was using natural material, not polyester. And within 45 days, I think sperm count was back to normal. And so, there's all of these things that I think are important in thinking about your environment. But if you can minimize toxins, improve your diet, and improve your sleep, I think those are the foundational things that give you the energy that allow you to do things like work out more, exercise more, move more in your day to day, even things like buying a treadmill. Like I use a treadmill desk a lot of the day, incredibly useful way to get 5,000, 10,000 steps a day without literally even thinking about it
on a treadmill.
Yeah, totally. Exactly. So I think honestly that to me, so often like people overlook the basics. Everyone wants a hack. Everyone wants to know like if I butthole sun and do 30 minutes of sauna and train my neck, like I'll unlock some insane state of health. And I think very often it just comes down to how have you designed your environment and is that environment health promoting or, health detracting?
Yeah. Yeah. The number one performance hack is sleep, but it's not a hack.
Yep. 100%.
I love that you brought up animals because, my observation is like every living thing on this planet seeks balance and homeostasis, except for humans.
Yep.
And I would apply that not just to ambitious humans, but actually all humans. Like ambitious humans, right? We think we can just keep going forever. We think we can work like this is new craze in San Francisco, 996, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week, like 72-hour weeks. And we think somehow we can do that, which is bullshit. So that's out of balance. But even, I'm going to stereotype here, like just the regular person with a regular job who does their job. They're not particularly inspired. They come home and then they just numb themselves with Netflix or doom scroll. They're also unbalanced. Like they're not healing themselves. They don't have time in nature. They're not moving. They're eating crap. I'm totally stereotyping, but like, anyway, like we're just out of balance. And like, I think we are separate from nature. We're nature. Like every living thing is nature. And so we have 100%. To come back from that. And of course we have to consume nature, right? When you go into the grocery store, you go to the extremes, never in the middle, wherever the fruit and veg is and organic meats. But not the packaged stuff.
100%. Yeah, I completely agree with you.
I'm curious for you, like, again, often founders will say they feel like they have to, like I said before, like I have to sacrifice sleep. I don't have time or I don't have energy to work out. I'm too busy to take a lunch break. I can't take, little restorative breaks here and there. Of course, they're just making it harder for themselves. But like you are a founder, you've founded multiple companies. So like, how has going on this journey made you, like, has it made you a better founder? Have you, do you feel like you would have achieved more if you sacrificed the way everyone else does? Like what's been the impact for you as a founder?
Yeah, I think that a lot of this stuff comes down to like, what timeline are you thinking about and optimizing for? For me, like, is it true that if you looked at a 1 month output, someone that was doing 996 would outperform someone that was doing like 45, 50 hours a week? I think so. Like, I really do think that some of these people, they will sacrifice and burn a lot of things, burn their personal health, burn relationships, burn all these sorts of things, to try and like shift as much benefit or performance into a short period of time as possible. I think that can make sense for a time. Frankly, like, there was certainly a phase in my life, when I started my first company, Kettle and Fire, where I was working a lot. And I was weirdly starting a health company and was like not the healthiest I've ever been, for sure.
Yeah.
But I think that like first year, 2 years can often be very challenging. However, though, I think that as I have like fixed my environment, done a lot from a health standpoint, I certainly have much more energy, and feel like excited and energetic to show up to work. And frankly, like, Kettle and Fire is 10 years old now. Almost all of the benefits in that company and almost all of the value in that company has been created in the last like 2 or 3 years. Like, there is such a real way in which just being able to stay in the game for a long period of time and attack every single day with energy over a 10-year period. I think that is where so much of the value of starting a company, where it gets created and delivered. And I think that if you're doing 996 for 2 years, 3 or 4 years at the start of your career, with very few exceptions, I think it's just going to be hard to maintain that pace for a very, very long period of time and still be sane, like your life, get excited by the company, work with other people that, that inspire you. That said, though, I think that this is probably advice for the average. I am frankly, it does seem like certain people like the Elons and others do seem to work something more like a 996 than not, and have been since they were like 23 or something. So I don't know. All I know is for me that I feel like great, high energy. I show up with health, and like, I feel like I can do this forever, which is not something that I see all of my friends necessarily feel.
Yeah. Elon's a dangerous example. I think he's an outlier on many dimensions. I actually think he's Martian, which is why he's so hell-bent on getting back there. So
Yep.
dangerous to follow him as an example. But you didn't use this word, but when you talk about staying in the game, you're really referring to what Warren Buffett thinks is the most powerful force in the universe, which is compounding.
Yep.
Like,
Exactly.
just growing a little bit year after year after year. You look up one day and you have a big company. Or like compounding a skill, like, I don't know, I practice guitar 2 hours a day. I make a tiny little bit of progress each day, but I fast forward a few years and I'm like a virtuoso guitarist, So
Yep.
yeah, it's just staying in the game.
I could not agree more.
I'm curious, is it just time? Like, if you look at the kind of that inflection with Kettle and Fire, is it just now a market trend? Like, I certainly, I was a CrossFitter forever. I think you've been a CrossFitter, so we need to talk about that.
Yep.
But in the CrossFit community, everyone was talking about bone broth and like, is it just timing, or did you find you were more creative because you were less stressed? Like, what was it that caused the inflection?
Yeah, I think it was two things. Like, when I started Kettle and Fire, for me, the question was just always, when I started Kettle and Fire, for me, the question was much more, is this going to be like, this is going to work at some point? There is indefinite demand and desire for products that are healthier for you, grass-fed, toxin minimized, and like much more nutrient dense than exists today. It felt like, for me, the question was, definitely people are going to want more bone broth. They're going to want a product that is clean, high protein, grass-fed, all the things that I think are important. It was just a matter of when. And I think that for me, the thing that I was just curious about was what will it take to like build this trend, and how in the interim can we build supply chain, marketing, team, sales capacity? And I think that the trend has grown really nicely in the last 2 years. Protein demand has just absolutely exploded.
Sure has.
And I think that people are realizing more and more every single day that our food system is poisonous, that people are malnourished, and that people are not getting the nutrition that they need to thrive. And I think that
Mhm.
bone broth and Kettle and Fire is just a huge solve. It's like literally the highest protein per calorie product that you can consume.
Mm, I didn't
And
know that.
yeah, and we have like what I would call by far the highest quality product on the market. And so for us, I think it was a matter of time. And like now it's grown steadily, every single year since we started the company. And, again, talking about compounding, here we are 10 years in, it's like quite a big
Mm,
business, which has been really cool to see.
I love it. As an aside, listening to you, you've clearly done a lot of research. So I'm wondering, are we overdoing it on protein? Like I'm doing a gram per pound now. It feels good. I feel good. But like, yeah, what are your thoughts? Are we overdoing it on protein?
Yeah, I think that so often the mistake of the last like several years has been sort of like trying to optimize around one macro and missing a
Hmm.
lot of like what goes into that macro. And so when people say, not to like call you out, but like when someone says like I'm optimizing for 1 gram per body per kilogram or pound of body weight, um, oftentimes they're not talking about like what is the type of protein that you're getting.
Hmm.
And do I think that someone that is eating a ton of like vegan protein powder and using like generic peas and getting a pound of protein, it's like, I'm not really sure that that's healthy. And I think that oftentimes people will over optimize for one metric, like a protein macro. In what they miss is like the body is a very complex system. Like our biology is meant to try and search out and get nutrients so that we can thrive. I think that if you eat a bunch of your calories from whole food sources, very often, like if you have a focus on protein, eating it from whole food sources, you'll sort of know, am I getting enough to meet my nutritional goals? If you're trying to like add muscle, you're working out intensely, all this, like I think a pound of protein per body weight can be a great goal. If you're not willing to make any other changes to your life and you're just trying to hit like a macro goal, and eating your vegan protein and walking 3,000 steps a day and never strength training, I don't know. I'm
Yep.
more skeptical that that is like the right thing to aim for.
Yeah, that's totally fair. Yeah. So, I'm 55. I did CrossFit for 6 years. I just stopped 2 months ago, in fact. Um,
Why'd you stop?
Burpees.
Yeah.
Just I just hate them. And then doing, I don't know, like 100 of a thing. And I just feel like I loved it. I loved the community. I actually, years ago wrote a blog post about how CrossFit made me a better executive because I just created this discipline. Like before
Yep.
I showed up to work, I went to CrossFit. We do some batshit crazy shit in CrossFit. And I don't know if you hit a 1 rep max deadlift or nail a handstand push up, or some other kind of complex gymnastics move, and you come into work, you're like, I'm unstoppable. I'm gonna
Yeah.
crush today. Like, look out. And then when you start to get serious about it, then you start prioritizing sleep and nutrition. And certainly Greg Glassman, who founded CrossFit, has been talking about just what you described, right? Like whole foods, right? Like
Yep.
his prescription for food just is so common sense, right?
100%.
So there's so much that I loved about it. I just found that, muscles are the fountain of youth. We lose a little bit of muscle mass and bone density every year over 40. Like I don't
Yep.
even remember 40. It was so long ago. And so I just wanted a bit more hypertrophy, um, and a little more recovery time for tennis, which is kind of another passion. But I love CrossFit.
Yeah.
It's like the opposite of Fight Club. Like you have to talk about it.
Yeah.
So we're checking. Are you still doing CrossFit?
Yeah. So I was doing CrossFit. I actually started Kettle and Fire out of when I was at, the San Francisco CrossFit box with Kelly Starrett. Uh,
Oh yeah, yeah.
I since then
That
have,
was a great the one that was the one down by the water, right?
yeah, near the Presidio.
I trained there and I felt like I walked into the cast of 300. Everyone was like shirtless and jacked. And I was like this little guy.
I must not have been there. So, uh, but yeah, I mean, it was amazing, like amazing community, amazing people. Like it was awesome. But I ended up stopping just because at that time, shortly after I started traveling a lot, and I found that like if I was gone for a week not doing CrossFit and came back, my body would just get absolutely wrecked. And so,
Yep.
yeah, I downshifted and focused on the business for a couple years and did more work than working out,
Mm-hmm.
for probably worse.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of work, I'm curious so you're running TrueMed. Kettle and Fire still exists. You're still running it, but maybe you have someone day to day, or you're like literally running it as well.
No, we have a CEO there. So
You have
I'm
a
like
CEO.
at the board level, chairman,
Okay.
everything like that.
Okay. You got the venture partner thing. I don't know how much time that takes. And then, of course, you have a brand new startup in the form of your child. So you're busy.
Yep.
Like, so how do you make it all work? Like, what systems, routines, boundaries? Like, yeah, how do you create order? How are you able to thrive in these different roles?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I would say at a very high level, I'm very fortunate. Like I work on, Kettle and Fire, like is an incredible business. We have an amazing team. I worked with many of them for many years before kind of stepping back, and they know what they're doing. And, with TrueMed, like I am firmly operating, and so much of my life is at the intersection from friends, professional work, at the intersection of like working on this chronic disease problem, that it feels in some way like it all just kind of works. Like I work harder on TrueMed and I meet interesting people. Some of those people are starting companies, which makes them good investment candidates from a seed stage standpoint. As Kettle and Fire grows, I like meet people through my work as a board member there and interface with people at Whole Foods or other retailers or influencers or others that like we end up partnering with on the TrueMed side. And so I do think a lot of these things work. Frankly, too, I think that the second piece of this is just I'm so fortunate to really enjoy what I do. And so I will say that like I don't work 996 in any sort of like rigorous I'm in the office sense, but I definitely work a lot.
Sure.
But like what people would say, oh, Justin is working right now. Like I just enjoy it. And so like I'll
Hmm.
wake up on a Saturday and be like, heck yeah, like I'm so lucky I get to work or, play on this company that I started, on this idea that I care about. One of my friends like started a company and he has a similar feeling, and he's like, I get to play this company today. It's not work. It's literally play. And for me,
I love it.
I feel like work is my hobby at this point. And I really enjoy it. And so I do it a lot.
Yeah, I think a lot of founders would feel that way, right? Like they love what they do. It could still lead to burnout. Like too much of a good thing is still too much. So like I don't know,
Yeah.
how does it feel? Do you feel like you have good sustainable boundaries, or sometimes do you feel like it's too much?
I mean, there are times where things feel like a lot for sure. There are some days. But I think that for the most part, it feels pretty good. Like, I think that, and maybe we're lucky, maybe it's a moment thing, but for right now, I think that we are hitting our goals. We have fairly aggressive goals. We have a great team. There's like tons of things that we can be doing better. There's tons of areas that I can lean in and do better. But I really do think that we're doing like some of the best work of our lives. We're solving an important problem. And we're really fortunate and lucky that we can kind of lean in and do this. And I think that it feels fairly sustainable right now.
Do the Surely and Perfect Keto brands, are they still around as well, and do you still own them?
Yeah. Yeah. So they're still definitely around.
Okay.
My time on those is kind of less.
Hmm.
We have good operators that are CEOs of each of the businesses. So I'm spending less time on those for sure, but yeah, they're still around, like have, some material number of customers, but, Perfect Keto's never raised any money.
Hmm.
Shirley's raised some money and is like doing a big retail push right now into the non-alc wine space. So I would say we're
Nice.
making progress.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So three times you put yourself out of a job and replaced yourself, which
Uh,
I'm guessing a bunch of folks would find interesting. Could you talk about how you made that work?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good question. So I'd say a couple things. We like I started the companies, and at some point as the companies kind of grew, I felt very strongly that, it was I really love the early stage. I love solving problems. I love doing all this stuff. But at some point, the reality is that like there reaches a time at the company where I think that I am not the best person in the world to take a company from X to Y. Like, and I think
Hmm.
for Kettle and Fire and Perfect Keto and Surely, like that was certainly the case. Surely I was actually never the CEO. But with the other companies, I think at some point I was like, there's a tremendous opportunity here. And there are people that are much more experienced and going to be much better at taking this company to the next level than me. And I think that in all of those cases, that has turned out to be the right decision.
I'm curious, do you make them a quasi co-founder, or they just get some options? Like, how do you make them behave like an owner? Because there's owner magic, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think they all have options. They all have equity. They all have like either profit shares or other sorts of things that, that make us both mission aligned. I very much believe in giving equity to everyone that I work with. And so yeah, so very much so. It is like an equity thing and a thing that I think is important to get alignment, across the leadership, management, everyone.
Yep. Cool.
Yeah.
So maybe as we wrap up, we began with TrueMed, and I'd love to come back to TrueMed. Like,
Yep.
I definitely feel that more and more people are aware that, hey, we're doing this wrong. Like, healthcare is anything but healthy. There's no prevention. I need to change my lifestyle. And so I've certainly begun to get involved with some wellness brands. I literally just joined the board of one this week. So I'm curious, how do brands work with TrueMed, and how do you turn this into a movement where there's just more and more people who are repairing themselves and thriving?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that we're at the beginning of a huge transformation in how people think about healthcare, at least in the US. Like I kind of mentioned this at the beginning, but the average person, when they think about the healthcare system, they think about doctors and hospitals and PCPs and pills and surgeries and all these things. None of these are actually like health promoting.
That's
in
right.
fact, all of these things are basically they're reactions to someone getting sick in some way, shape, or form. And that may have made sense at a time when, chronic disease was a fourth of what it is right now. And when most of the things that required hospital care and engagement with the healthcare system were more acute injuries, breaking a leg, childbirth, things like this. I think that now, as most of the spend and most of the issues in our healthcare system are chronic conditions, the whole system of like pills, prescriptions, surgeries, doctors that barely talk to you and don't know you from like the next 10 patients where they're going to spend 15 minutes with just makes increasingly less sense. And I think that like mathematically and fundamentally, people have to start thinking about healthcare through the lens of how do we actually make people healthy. And if you believe that and you think that is the case, then we are like on the precipice of more and more people starting to underwrite and think about things like food interventions, supplements, sleep aids, this whole host of things as actual medical interventions. Like that is the mission and the movement that TrueMed is working on starting. And frankly, like a lot of the data is on our side. If you look at many different studies, if you're working to treat or reverse obesity or treat or reverse even things like depression, there was a study that came out recently that showed that it was cycling, walking, strength training, yoga, tai chi, dancing. It was like 18 different things that involve movement were more effective than SSRIs when it came to treating treatment-resistant depression. And if you go to your doctor and say like, hey, I'm dealing with depression, it's pretty bad. What are they going to prescribe you? It's going to put you on an SSRI or send you to a therapist, both of which clinically, and the research is showing, work less well than many of the lifestyle interventions. And so we want to advocate and build this movement where people start to think about these effective lifestyle interventions as actual healthcare interventions, and other players in the healthcare system start to understand that and then are willing, eventually to pay for them, to incentivize people to do them, to like give you a certain amount off of your premium if you join a gym and go 5 times a week or eat healthy or whatever it is. And so that is the world that we're trying to build towards, and like the thing that I think it's a real opportunity in today's healthcare system.
Yeah, I love it. I definitely want to see that world happen. As an aside, this company's not in the US, but I know there's a US equivalent. Like I'm a customer of a company in Canada called Nia Health.
Yep.
And twice a year they come in to my house, draw a bunch of blood, I pee in a cup. I go to a facility and do a VO2 max test, and I do a DEXA scan. And the same way like an e-commerce brand or a SaaS company has like a dashboard with all these metrics, I have a dashboard with all my biomarkers and the trends, and then recommended lifestyle interventions for anything that's off. So like this.
Yep. Amazing.
I'm running my health the way I run a company,
Yep.
with the KPIs and the tracking. So
it's amazing.
I really hope more and more people do that.
Yeah, I could not agree more. And I think there's a bunch of these companies that are popping up, at least in the US, like Function Health, Superpower, that are starting to do these kinds of things and make this easy, which is really exciting.
Well, Justin, thank you so much for making the time. And I really hope that this conversation motivates more people to jump on the health bandwagon. You know, I say to my CEOs all the time, like, I don't know, like a healthy person has 100 priorities and a sick person has one priority, which is to be healthy.
100%.
So like when we go sick, we realize like nothing matters but being healthy.
I could not agree more.
Awesome.
Hey, thanks for listening to the Startup CEO Show. If you'd like to connect with me, be sure to visit my website at markmacleod.me or follow me on LinkedIn at @the_Mark_MacLeod or Twitter at @markmacleod_. And if you want to tune in again next week, be sure to subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. We'll see you next time.